Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome in to today's Daily Sports Take. Now, before I get into today's topic, I do want to give a quick shout out to all the medical workers who are on the front lines battling COVID-19. I'm not sure if you can see it in the background there. I'll put a shot up as well. But the A on A Mountain here in Tempe was painted blue yesterday in honor of all of those on the front lines battling COVID-19. So thank you to those who brought some recognition to the medical workers, and of course a special thank you to all of the medical workers out there battling for us every single day as we move closer and closer to ending this pandemic just one day at a time. So for today's topic, I want to talk about sleeper prospects in this year's draft class. Now, I've already released my mock drafts version 1.0 and 2.0, the first round only, so be sure to check out those videos, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't subscribed already. So I've already got over the first round, but there's some guys that won't be drafted in the first round that I think could still bring potentially some first round value to the franchises that decide to draft them. So sleepers are hard to define. Some define them as guys that played in smaller colleges. Some define them as guys that should have been drafted higher than they were. Some define them as people that maybe aren't going to be drafted. I'm going to define sleepers in these next couple of videos here as players who I think will bring extreme value for the spot that they're likely to be drafted in. So what that means, it could be a first rounder who should maybe go higher in the first round. It could be a third rounder who maybe could have gone in the second round. That's the definition that I'm playing with. So we're going on the offensive side of the ball today. So starting with a quarterback, I think one quarterback that stands out to me as a sleeper comes from Washington State, Anthony Gordon, who's a one-year starter out of Washington State. Now, when you look at his measurables, they don't really stand out. But when you look at what he's overcome in his career and what he did his senior season, where his only season as a starter after Gardner Minshew left, who we'll talk about here in a second, was able to break all of the passing records in completions, touchdowns, and passing yards, put up incredible numbers. He doesn't have the biggest arm in the world, but his mentality is what separates him from the rest of the pack. Now, if you recall, Gardner Minshew is now the starting quarterback for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He was drafted last year out of Washington State for very similar reasons. Not the biggest arm, but he was very outgoing, a leader, and was hard-nosed on the field. Minshew has actually come out and said that he believes Gordon is very similar to him and is a guy that everybody wants to rally around, and that's why he had so much success in his 1 year as a starter at Washington State, and while he will continue to have success in the NFL. Now, Gordon was a community college quarterback first who ended up getting no offers before Mike Leach brought him into Washington State. At Washington State, he had to redshirt and then sit on the bench for 2 seasons. So you know he's not going to be selfish. He's not going to want to make it all about him. And if you're able to draft him in the 3rd or 4th round, he could be a guy that is a starting quarterback for a few years and then turns into a backup who gets starts throughout his career. Think of Ryan Fitzpatrick, who came into the league as a guy who was expected to be a starter, at least an average starter in the NFL. Well, now he's been in the league for what seems like forever, and he's made starts for a plethora of different teams. So he's a guy that's going to be a good backup. He's going to fight every day in practice. He's going to compete to make your starting quarterback better. And so I really see no downsides in drafting a quarterback like Anthony Gordon out of Washington State. So I have him as my quarterback sleeper in the 2020 draft class. Now moving to running back, my sleeper for this year might get drafted in the 2nd or 3rd round. His name is Eno Benjamin, the running back at Arizona State University. Eno is only 5'9", 195 pounds, so he's not a big running back. However, he put up big numbers, especially in the sophomore season when he broke the ASU rushing record with over 1,600 rushing yards. Now, his junior season, he didn't put up as big of numbers, only 1,000 yards rushing. But even he will admit a lot of it came from him taking more of a role as a leader, not focusing so much on himself and focusing on what's better for the team. Herm Edwards has put a new offense into place at ASU, and it finally took form last season. You also have to account for the fact that their quarterback, Jaden Daniels, is also a dual threat, so he took a lot of the rushing yards as well. And because he is a great quarterback prospect, they pass the ball a little bit more than they did in previous years. So Eno Benjamin, I think, is going to fit into this league as a running back by committee running back. Now, most teams, unless you have a Derrick Henry or a Christian McCaffrey or a Todd Gurley in his prime, use running backs by committee. So I do think there's plenty of teams that he would fit for. Think of somebody like Kevin Falk, because he's able to use his hands in the passing game out of the backfield and even run some routes, even though he looks somewhat confused when he's lined up as a wide receiver. But I do think that is something he can continue to work on. He's also very similar to James White, but I think you can use him more in the rushing game than just the passing game. So that's where I don't compare him too much to James White, but his hands out of the backfield do compare to that level, where he's a security blanket for a lot of guys. So I think a team like Tampa Bay, if they could draft him in the 3rd or 4th round, would be very happy to have Eno Benjamin. He'd be a perfect fit with a quarterback like Tom Brady. So I have him as a sleeper in this draft because personally I feel like he should be drafted somewhere in the 2nd round, but I do think he is going to slip to the 3rd, 4th, maybe even the 5th round. Now, finally, the deepest sleeper of this trio here in this draft class at the wide receiver slot, I have Tyler Johnson out of Minnesota. He's 6'1", 206 pounds. He led the Big Ten in catches and yards last season, 86 catches, over 1,300 receiving yards. Now, when you look at Johnson, nothing stands out as far as his speed and agility. 3-cone drill, not good. Overall speed in the 40-yard dash, not excellent at all. However, he's a guy that just makes plays. His sophomore season, he played mostly on the outside and was a big red zone threat. His junior and senior season, he proved that he could play in the slot as he played over 80% of his snaps out of the slot. So I think that out of all the receivers in this draft class, and yes, this is one of the deepest draft class in probably NFL history at the wide receiver position, I think he's a guy that could get drafted in the 3rd or 4th round and make an immediate impact on day number 1. Think of DK Metcalf last year, who had all of the numbers in college but still slipped in the draft because scouts didn't like his 3-cone drill and they thought maybe he wasn't agile enough. Listen, receivers like Johnson and Metcalf don't have to be agile all the time. They can use their strength and size to their advantage, whether it's in the slot to just get body position over the defender, or on the outside where they can win the jump balls, and in the red zone where they're able to go up and make plays. So I think that Tyler Johnson has one of the highest ceilings and one of the highest floors in this draft. I think worst case scenario, he turns into a really good number 3 receiver out of the slot for any team. And I think best case scenario, he turns into a number 1 on a team that doesn't have great receivers and a number 2 on a team that has another star receiver. Think of Tyler Boyd down in Cincinnati. Very similar situation, very similar skill sets to Tyler Johnson out of Minnesota. So he was the best receiver in the Big Ten over the last 3 seasons. And I think if you grab him in the 3rd round, a team like New England, Green Bay, New Orleans, the Chargers, any team like that could use an extra receiver would be well worth waiting to take him in the 3rd round instead of reaching for a receiver in the 1st or 2nd. So there you have it. There's 3 sleepers on the offensive side of the ball that I chose for the 2020 NFL Draft Class. Was there any other player from maybe your college or your alumni that you think is a sleeper in this draft class and I should mention him in a future video? If there are any, be sure to comment their names and their school down below. Also, I'd really love it if you leave a like on this video. And as always, if you haven't subscribed already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. So with that, everybody, enjoy the rest of your Friday.